Hi, this is Dr. Kurt Wohler for AutismRecoverySystem.com. The title of this video is Autism, Environmental Toxins, and Necessary. So I've talked before about my four-pillar approach to biomedical intervention that either involves lab testing, supplements, medications, etc. And it really breaks down to dietary intervention, foundational supplements like a starter packet, a multivitamin, etc., digestive system assessment, looking for yeast, bacteria, other digestive system toxins, and then methylations. So that really rounds out the foundational approach. I truly believe that those four things need to be paid attention to quite strongly before you can progress or achieve real lasting benefit from other interventions. Now, other interventions is a long list. It could incorporate a tremendous amount of things, from antiviral therapy to hyperbaric oxygen to chelation to even things like speech and occupational therapy, etc. It can also incorporate environmental testing, which is something that has become very important over the past number of years with advancing research into environmental toxicity and the link to autism. There is a wide variety of sources of toxic chemicals, from insecticides to solvents, soaps and plastics. Food, water can be polluted, certainly air, depending on what kind of city you live in. Fungicides, there's a lot of things that all of us are exposed to. Now, if we look at toxic metals, there's been a long-standing controversy with regards to mercury exposure. It's clearly known that mercury exposure in the United States, even according to the Centers for Disease Control, has contributed to hundreds of thousands of babies born each year in the US with what are considered to be unsafe levels of mercury, even according to the Environmental Protection Agency safety standards. And approximately 1 in 6 women of childbearing age also have high levels of mercury that are considered to be higher than what the Environmental Protection Agency considers to be safe. We know there's an increasing rate of autism. If you go back to the mid-70s, we're talking about 1 in 5,000 kids being diagnosed with autism. Fast forward now to 2010, that jumped to about 1 in 110. And as of today, 2017, 2018, the time of the recording of this video, we're looking at about 1 in 68 kids being diagnosed autistic. And that's pure autism. That's not just kind of somewhere on the spectrum or language delays. That's meeting the criteria for autism. Okay, so where does it go from here? Well, I think the problem is nobody really knows, but we're certainly on a frightening trend. This was actually a slide taken from a discussion on the chemical called glyphosate. Glyphosate is the ingredient found in the herbicide called Roundup, which is used all over the world. And this was a figure talking about if the trend continues in glyphosate use, in environmental chemical exposure use, even just here in the United States, that the rough estimates are that by the year 2032, half the children born in the United States will have a diagnosis of autism. Clearly, there's a problem. Let's talk a little bit about pesticide exposure. Depending on where you are in the country or where you might be in the world, will determine sometimes what kind of pesticides you're exposed to. Certain people, like in the Central Valley of California, are going to have more direct exposure versus somebody who may be in more of a city environment, but then the city environment can also have its own exposures because of chemical spraying on plants. If you live in the suburbs, I've seen people with high levels of chemicals as well from the insecticides and the pesticides sprayed on golf courses or sprayed on people's lawns. So none of us are completely impervious, I guess you should say, to the exposure to these chemicals. The problem with autistic individuals is they often have a reduced ability to detoxify pesticides. There's a specific enzyme called PON1, and the activity of PON1 is to help us to break down these organophosphates often used as insecticides. And it's found that in some studies, autistic individuals have a less capability or a reduced capability of their PON1 activity. And PON1 is one of the where it actually got its name from is it was or is an enzyme that actually is involved in the breakdown of a chemical called parathion. And in Great Plains Laboratories GPL tox panel, one of the chemicals that gets evaluated is something called diethyl phosphate that can give some indication of PON1 status. This is a test that I highly recommend parents of autistic individuals do for your kids. So the GPL tox panel, it's a urine assessment. It looks at over 172 different markers from a wide range of toxic chemicals. Okay, so vinyl chlorides to benzene to xylene, even this 2,4-D, which is now a common weed killer. And this was actually used in the Vietnam War in the compound called Agent Orange. So a lot of usefulness to this test. Organophosphates are one of the biggest problems that individuals with autism have as far as how their body detoxes. And these are very strong inhibitors of certain enzyme systems in the body that can greatly affect behavior, affect the brain and nervous system. It can lead to sweating, excessive salivation, abnormal behavior, as I just mentioned, aggression, depression. There's a wide variety of things. And this test actually comes from a young child with autism. There's a marker on the GPL tox test that looks at mitochondrial toxicity. One of the things that chemical toxins do is they can definitely stress the mitochondria. And remember, the mitochondria are these energy factories found within our cells that help produce the energy currency that runs our brain, runs our gut, runs our immune system, our heart, our blood system is all dependent on the adequate production of these energy chemicals. And so this Ti-glycine marker can give an indication of mitochondrial stress coming about because of the presence of toxic compounds. Now this is just a fancy slide that looks at the methylation system. We know that autistic individuals tend to be deficient in glutathione. Well, it turns out that again, if our PON1 activity is being occupied by the presence of these organophosphates, then it's linked to the greater methylation cycle in general. So therefore, the methylation cycle, which has an effect on language and eye contact and language and comprehension and attention, will also be compromised. The other test that is absolutely necessary to get is the organic acid test from Great Plains Lab 2. And there's a few organic acid tests that can give some indication to the possibility of chemical exposure. You'd still have to do the GPL tox test to make sure. But this marker number 24 called succinic, this is now being considered almost an independent marker of mitochondrial dysfunction linked to some type of toxic stress. Now, it could be chemical, it could be heavy metal, and as is being determined, it actually may also, in some individuals, be coming from mold exposure. But chemical exposure is probably top of the list. That's why it's important to get that GPL tox test. This marker number 58 on the organic acid test, called pyroglutamic, is a marker of glutathione deficiency. If the marker is elevated, it indicates that glutathione is deficient. This other marker here, 2-hydroxybutyric, can give some insight into that as well. So we have a website called Lab Test Plus where these labs from Great Plains laboratory can be ordered. So the organic acid test can be ordered from LabTest Plus. The GPL tox test can also be ordered from here as well. And the third one that I mentioned just briefly in this was the glyphosate. The glyphosate test is important because it's looking at that compound that's found in that Roundup herbicide. So the organic acid test, the GPL tox, and the glyphosate, those three are critical. And there's actually a combination panel called the EnviroTox panel that incorporates all three of those tests. And those are available either directly from Great Plains Lab or through LabTest Plus. Now, LabTest Plus also provides additional service on lab test review, meaning that when the labs are ordered through the site, the results are sent to us, and then I sit down and I do a personalized review of your child's lab or labs, and then give action step suggestions based on the relevant markers. So you can go to labtestplus.com and look for a complete list of labs available. And then, of course, you can always come back onto the forum in this website too and post questions to me as well. So this is Dr. Kurt Wohler for AutismRecoverySystem.com. Thank you.